Today's daf we're going to be learning is Sanhedrin daf kaftet. Today's daf is sponsored by Suri Davis in honor of the first birthday of her granddaughter Hallel Ruth Bat Shai Tzvi and Esther Schiffer Goldman. Today's daf is sponsored by Harriet Hartman in loving memory of her grandson Ephraim ben Liat Shmuel Jackman Hashem Yikom Damo on his first year at site. He fell in Gaza 1 year ago. He was a faithful daf Yomi learner even in his Namer tank, an inspiration to us all for his dedication to Torah, his beautiful midot, his maturity and humility, and the love he shared with his family. Yehi Zechor Baruch. Today's daf is sponsored by Michelle Feiglin in loving memory of her father, Natan ben Dvorah Shlomo Elimelech in his 9th year at site, and in loving memory of their grandson, Neriah Yosef Hoshea ben Gidon Babital. My father was liberated from Buchenwald, rebuilt his life in Melbourne, Australia. He inspired my love of learning Torah, and every lunchtime in the middle of his working day can be found in front of his Gemara. He had great success in business, but always said his biggest success was his family. Okay, we're going to get started. Before we get started, I must share with you a short little thing that I received yesterday, or actually when I woke up this morning. So I did all these charts yesterday, the Canva displays, which you can also find in PDF format for the last 2 days of Groving. And I sent them around in a few groups, like of Daf Yomi teachers. And I get a video and some photos of a bunch of Hasidim in somewhere in America speaking in Yiddish, having a shiur in Yiddish with my sheets printed in big, and using them as for the shiur. So we get to all kinds of places, and it was really nice to see. Okay, with that, we will get started with our daf, a much simpler daf, and finished with the krovim and all the relatives. We have a few little small issues to deal with, but not at all the confusing who's who and what's what. I strongly recommend if you didn't, I know some people learn while they're walking, while they're exercising, or whatever you're doing, while they're in the middle of cooking. But if you didn't have a chance to look at them, it really definitely puts things in order and helps organize. So it might be helpful to look over that. Okay, let's get started. B'nei chamua demar ukva. Okay, so what we were talking, let's just quick review of the end of yesterday's daf, because after that whole long daf, who remembers the end? And the end was much simpler when we rushed through it. So we went back to the Mishna with Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda had this approach. We said that a lot of these people are connected through marriage. Remember, once we don't have the Mishnah Rishonah anymore, the early version that just had the men, but a lot of connections through marriage also are disqualified, but not if they get divorced or the relative dies and then they're no longer connected to the husband anymore. However, Rabbi Yehuda said if they had a child, then they're still connected, which again, all of this stuff is confusing as it was. It all makes a lot of sense, right? If there's no more children, eventually the connection, and it depends on the situation, obviously, but as a general rule over time, but if there's a child there, then you're going to end up being connected because it's a grandchild that's connected to you. And besides just the connection, you also have an actual relative that you have in common still. So now we have the question was, do we hold like Rabbi Yehuda or not? And we saw there was a debate. So we had Rav being quoted as saying, yes, we hold like Rabbi Yehuda. Rav Nachman, who often goes against Rav because he's usually in the Shmuel school, said, no, we don't hold like Rabbi Yehuda. And then they quoted Rabbi Baruch who quoted Rabbi Yochanan, who said, we don't hold like Rabbi Yehuda either. And that's from Israel. I just want to remind you that because it's going to come up in the story. And we said perhaps Rabbi Baruch didn't say that name of Rabbi Yochanan. He was talking about some other psak having to do with relatives, according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, and that was where we ended. Now we have a story. B'nei chamua demar ukva. This is a pretty complicated way of saying his brothers-in-law, okay, his wife's brothers, but it's the sons of his father-in-law, which basically means his wife's brothers. Okay, so let's just say it simpler, his wife's brothers. Come before him, krovim b'nitrach kumar ukva, if you remember, was a resh galuta. He was the exilarch. Now, he had relatives that were krovim b'nitrach ku. His sister died, and they were no longer relatives of his. Presumably they had grandchildren, okay, or children, right? Which means that now, they had children, so he still had nephews, let's say, that were connected. Atu l'kamei dedina. They go before Mar Ukva for a case. They have some issue. They say, we're going to come to your court. Amar lahu, psilna lachu ledina. I am not allowed to judge you. Now, we assume this has to do with Rabbi Yehuda, right? So, Amrule, my da'ateh, ki Rabbi Yehuda. What, you hold like Rabbi Yehuda? They say to him, Anna, my tina igarta mimarav. We're going to bring you a letter from Israel, de'ein halacha ki Rabbi Yehuda. It says specifically, a letter written from Israel, that the halacha is not like Rabbi Yehuda, right? It's interesting to think they pass these letters around, right? We have like a formal rabbi's letter, that we don't hold this way, and you can judge us.
at the Tennessee time.
Mute
He
all.
said he was in charge.
Okay. I guess I had it muted. Okay. Amar lahu. Achu bakaba dekira idbaku bachu. Delo ka'amin apsila chulidina elamishum. Delo. Okay, maybe I shouldn't read this all at once. Let's read it part by part. Achu bakaba dekira idbaknu bachu. Now, when he said psilna chulidina, basically saying, I am not able to rule for you, and you could translate as I'm disqualified from ruling for you. I specifically didn't translate that like that for a reason, and you'll see why. Because what he says right now is, do you think I'm connected to you like wax? You think we're connected? You think I think we're connected? No, I'm not connected to you at all. Okay. The fact that you have children doesn't connect you to me at all. I didn't say I'm disqualified for you for judgment. I said I'm not able to judge you. I'm disqualified from judging you, not because you're related to me. No, I'm not related to you at all. And not only that, it sounds like I don't want to be related to you, but you are known not to listen to the rulings of the court. So I don't want to I don't want to judge you in a case because you're just not going to listen to what I say. So why would I judge you if you're not going to listen? And by the way, they posket from here that if you're a judge and a case comes before you, right? We talked already about can you reject a case or not, right? Now, if you're a court, can't really reject a case, but if the people are known that they don't listen to what the court says, then you can reject the case. Okay, and that's basically what he's saying. So this has nothing to do with Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, what you do see here is um, that he actually wait, sorry, I lost my train of thought. What you do see here though is it seems like we don't hold like Rabbi Yehuda, right? Because they brought this letter saying we don't hold like Rabbi Yehuda. And then he could have got out of it more easily without offending them by saying that. Ohev zeshushbino. So now we get to this issue of the relative. Okay. So of the someone who you're very close with. Now, Rabbi Yehuda also added in the Mishnah that someone who's your soneh or someone who's your ohev, someone you have a very strong good relationship or very strong bad relationship with, you can't testify for them and they can't testify for you. Vikama. Now we want to know. Now, according to the Mishnah, it said, what is a soneh? It's someone you didn't speak to for 3 days. And what is an ohev? It's someone who's your shushbin at your wedding. Now, it's a little bit strange. Like, if someone was your shushbin at your wedding 30 years ago, does that mean you're still very close with them, right? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So, what exactly does it mean? And how long after the wedding do we consider you still the shushbin? And what if you never had a wedding? So then is there no one who's your ohev? It's a very weird definition, but I guess they're trying to come up with a formal definition of close friend. And they're going to majorly limit this in the Gemara. Vikama, for how long after being Yushushbin is this person going to be disqualified for being a witness? Amar Rabbi Abba, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, Amar Rav, Kol Shiva Yemei Mishteh. Only for the 7 days, right? The ones you use Sheva Brachot in, those 7 days? Yes. Rabbanan Mishmei de Rava Amrei, Afilu Miyom Rishon Ve'elach. Only the day of the wedding. And that's it. After that, they can testify for you. So they really, really, really limit this halacha. Okay. And I think it's because, you know, what do you call it? Like a fair weather friend, or, you could be a friend one day, you could be a friend, not a friend another day. And basically, we're going to say on the day of your wedding, that's when, there's the closest. First of all, we all know, like when your best friend gets married, you feel this very close bond on that day that you might not even always feel, but there's that very strong emotional feeling then. And that's when someone's in Ohev or perhaps the week. And that's it. They really limit it. Hasone, kol shelo diberito, right? 3 days, babe. Now they're going to find the source for this in a Braita. Okay, a source in the Torah that's listed in a Braita. Tanu Rabbanan. Vihu lo oyev lo, idenu. V'lo mevakesh rato, yedinenu. Okay, let's understand what this is talking about. These psukim seem to be totally taken out of context, but it's a good example. If you look inside in the psukim themselves and in the context, you'll see it's not so crazy. So we're talking about someone who kills another person, bishgaga. Now, the way this pasuk generally is translated, I'll go to the pasuk even before it. In befeta below eva, if this happens on all of a sudden and there's no hatred or anything. Hadafo or below eva, hadafo, you pushed him without meaning, or it knocked him. Oh, hishlich halav, or kol kli below tztiya, or something up, you somehow threw something on him by accident without intending. Or there was a stone that you didn't see and that hit the person. Vayapel alav vayamot, and it fell on the person and died. Okay, so that's all these possible options. And then it says, V'hu lo oyev lo v'lo mevakesh rato. And also, we always look for motivation in a murder. You happen not to hate this person, and you're not trying to, do bad to this person. So it sounds like this is a criteria for determining are you a rotzeach b'shgaga or not? Was this accidental murder or was it intentional? So it has to be that you didn't hate him at all. Now, there's a lot of repetition here. First of all, below Eva already appeared in the pasuk before, which means without hatred. And it says the same thing twice. You're not an enemy of his, and you don't intend to do bad to this person. So that really means one and the same thing. Now, the Torah often repeats things as kind of poetic way, but that always opens the word for drashan. So comes the drashan and says, V'hu lo yevlo is extra. So what does it mean? Yi'idenu, which means you can't testify for someone, right? Sorry, if you're not an oyev, you can testify. If you are, you can't. V'lo mevakesh rato yidinenu. As long as you don't have it out for this person, you can judge them. Okay. Now, how did we get to judge and testimony here? This wasn't talking about it at all. However, the very next pasuk, and I want to point out, in the middle of the pasuk we just read, it said, Vayapel alav vayamot, the person dies. Then it starts saying, and you happen not to hate them. Okay? Which again, could have been understood the way we explained it originally. But the next pasuk says, V'shaftu ha'ita ben hamakeh ben goel adam, and the community judges you, right, between the person, the murderer, and the relative who wants to avenge the death. V'itzilu ha'ida tarotzech miyad goel adam. And then, right, we had the Vishaftu, Vitzilu. From there, we learned 10 judges. From there, we learned 20 judges. Remember the 10 and the 10. That's how we got to 23. Immediately after, it starts talking about judges, and it starts talking about judging the case. So perhaps the way this drasha works is it understands once the person died in the pasuk, from the second half of that pasuk, we're already moving into the court, where it leaves the realm of the what happened and it moves into the realm of the court. And then it says, well, who can judge you? Again, it's definitely somewhat out of context, but it's not a crazy, totally out there drasha. So now we have the following. Eshkachan soneh ohev minalan. So that pasuk teaches you, it teaches you two things. Remember, the issue of a judge everybody agrees with. The question is, can you be an aid or not? And that only Rabbi Yehuda disqualifies you. The rabbis think you can. So this is Rabbi Yehuda's drasha, hu lo yevlo, means as long as you don't hate him, you can testify. But if you do, you can't testify. And you can judge him as long as you don't hate him. If you do, you can't judge. Eshkachan soneh ohev minalan. Okay, so that's for the soneh. What about the friend, the close friend? Kari behachi. We'll read the pasuk like this, even though it doesn't say this. V'hu lo yevlo v'lo hevlo. Okay, you don't hate him and you don't love him. Then yi'idenu. Then you can testify. V'lo mevakesh rato v'lo tovato. Okay, they basically add in that. Then yidinenu. So the Gemara says, Midi ohev k'tiv. It doesn't say that in the pasuk. So how are you just making that up? To which they say, Elas farahu. It's just logical. Oyev my time. Why is someone who's your enemy? Because you specifically want to do bad for them, right? You're so far distance from them. Ohev nami mikar v'date, and the ohev, it's the opposite. We're worried because you're so close that you'll lie also. Rabbanit. Now, what about the rabbis? What do they do with these psukim? We assume that they darshan them as well. So what do they do with them if they don't need it for the yidenu? Now, the dayan part they're going to still have. Well, hi lo yevelom avakesh rato my darshibe. What do the rabbis do with this? Chad the dayan. Okay, so one is for the judge. Idach kedetanya. The other one is used for the following bright. Amar Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina v'hu lo yevlo v'lo mevakesh rato. Mikan is a very interesting halacha. L'shnei talmidei chachamim sheson'im ze et ze she'ein yoshvim b'din ke'echad. It's all about judges, which also again makes sense in the context. V'shaftu v'itzilu, right? The next psukim are all about the judges. Two judges who hate each other can't sit together on the same case. And that's because what are we worried about? Their personal vendetta is going to get in the way, right? One's going to argue against the other just for the sake of argument and just for the sake of hating the other person. And maybe not, the truth won't come out. We need the truth to come out, and you can't have two people who hate each other doing this together, okay, which is obviously a very interesting and very relevant halacha. Okay, now we're moving on to the next Mishnah. We're getting to what actually goes on in the court. This is a type of Mishnah, like many Mishnayot we've learned, like in Yoma and in Arvei Pesachim, where we're talking about the Leila Seder, where it's very, it's a narrative. This is what happens in the court. Okay, we start to get to, you can imagine what's going on. Like in Yoma, we imagine the Kohen Gadol walking in the temple, and this is the way it would work. Ketzad bodkim et hayedim. How do they check the witnesses? Hayu machnisim otan lecheder. They would put them in a room. And they would threaten them, okay, scare them into telling the truth. Umotzi'in kol adam lachutz. They take everybody out. We don't know who all these people are. We're going to get to this later, who goes out. Later, we're going to see they bring the litigants in. So perhaps the people who they're taking out are the litigants. Okay. Umishayrin et hagadol shebahen. And they just leave only that one witness, the more prominent of the two. So they start with the more prominent witness. We're going to get back to the gadol also later, but not talking about the judge, not talking about the witnesses, but the judge later on in this Mishnah. So now we're talking only about monetary cases here. And they say, right, how do you know that this person owes money to that person? Imamar, if he says the following, Hu amar li shani chayav lo. He told me he owes money. Or ish ploni amar lo li shu chayav lo. Or someone else told me that he told them that he owes them money. Lo amar klum. This is not valid. Okay, just a person's admission, and we're going to see later why this is. Okay, a person just saying I owe someone money doesn't mean anything. Okay, we're going to get to this later. And somebody else, if you quote, right, that's hearsay. You're quoting someone else who said this. What you have to say is, in front of us, meaning me and the other witness, he admitted or she admitted that they owed 200 zuz or whatever the amount is to the other person. Now, bifanenu, what the Gemara is going to assume means is the person, the litigant, right? The really the borrower here, we're going to call this person, the borrower basically has to appoint the witnesses to be witnesses. If the borrower did not appoint witnesses to be witnesses, even if they witnessed the borrower saying, I owe money to someone, that's not relevant. Now, we're talking here more about admissions and not about actually witnessing the loan itself. But that's because the loan itself could have been paid back. Like, you need to know that the person just said, I still owe money. Okay, now, I'm going to put that issue aside right now. But the important part here is bifanenu hoda. This creditor, this debtor, appointed us to be witnesses. That's what you're basically saying. Then we accept the testimony. Okay, that was with the first witness. What about the second? Well, we have to check them out separately. Why? To make sure their stories corroborate, right? If they're both in the room at the same time, one's going to hear what the other one says, and then, of course, they'll just say it exactly the same way. If it seems they both have the same story, then they rule, right? They discuss, figure out, is the person really obligated? Two say he's innocent, the other one says he's guilty, zakai. Okay, then, right, one says guilty, two say innocent, right? We're going to go innocent. Or again, here it's not exactly innocent, guilty, it's obligated or not obligated to pay the money. Okay, this is basic. I don't know why they're repeating it, perhaps for the next line. Okay, but 2-1, right, is always going to win. So whether it's to say you're obligated, you're not obligated. But if one says one and one says the other, and the second one doesn't know, or two say yes and two say no, and one of them says, I don't know, remember we learned this case where one person says, I don't know, I don't want to rule, then they're out, and we bring in two more. Even though in this case we end up with an even number, we just keep adding two more until we get to a majority. So now they finish, they decide, okay? We haven't yet issued the verdict. So how do they issue the verdict? They bring everybody in, okay? It's not clear who they bring in. See later, the Gemara is going to suggest they bring in the Baalei Din, okay? They bring in the litigants, where were they before? It's unclear. There's a few things unclear about this Mishnah. Hagadol Shabadayanim, where we go back again to the Gadol. Before was the most prominent witness speaks first. Now the most prominent judge gets up and issues the verdict. Ish ploni atazakai, ish ploni atachayav. That's all they say. They don't say it was a majority, it was it was an argument, everyone agreed, unanimous, right? They just say obligated or exempt. There's a great end to this Mishnah. When you walk out of court, how do we know that you can't do the following? Let's say it came out, the person was obligated. You can't walk out of court and say, listen, I was the one who said no. I didn't think you were obligated. I wanted to exempt you. Or I wanted to exempt right? Either directly to the person or just announce it. But everyone else said, no, he should be obligated. Right? What can I do? This is what we call the dissenting opinion. right? Nowadays, you often write up the dissenting opinion and you know exactly who said yes, who said no. They say you cannot do that, okay? And they say, or I don't know if they do it in all cases, certainly in big cases they do it. Um, Al emal, and there's either two psukim or one. I'm going to read the what's not read the one in parentheses. Holech rachil megales sod. Right, rechilut is a part of lashon hara, and rechilut is like revealing secrets. And there's certain secrets that you're not allowed to reveal in that way, and you shouldn't go out and say that. What's the problem? Well, the problem is that the person who was convicted is now going to be angry at the people. Right, it can go against some of the judges and not the other. Right, it's just a bad thing to do. You shouldn't talk about that. We just leave it as this is the verdict. Done. Now the Gemara starts with what do we say when we threaten the witnesses or try to scare them into not lying? We're going to have three opinions and each one's going to reject the previous. So, what do we say? I'm a Rabbi Yehuda. This is what we say. Nisiim v'ruach v'geshem ayin. There's clouds, there's wind, and you think it's going to rain, but there's no rain. Ish mitalal b'matat chesed, sheker. This is a person who brags about lying, okay, or glorifies himself by lying. Okay, lying causes lack of rain. What does lack of rain mean? You're not going to have produce. It means you're going to be poor, right? You're not going to have money. So don't lie. This is the pasuk in Mishle, Proverbs. Don't lie because lying will cause you not to have money. Well, and not rain, which basically means you won't have crops, which means you won't have anything to eat. The person could say, listen, that doesn't affect me because you could have 7 years of a famine. I wonder why they use seven, right? 7 years of a famine. And on the door of the craftsman, it doesn't reach, right? Like in Corona, there were some businesses that totally got destroyed, but other people's businesses thrived, right? Just because there's a famine doesn't mean I'll be affected. So basically, that if you want to use that as a scare tactic, this person might be a craftsman, which is irrelevant to him. Okay. And therefore, right, you could say recessions affect everybody ultimately, but there could be ways that it doesn't. And basically, this won't really scare anyone, or it won't scare everyone. So he suggests something else. Okay, this was Rabbi Yehuda suggested the first. Rabbi said, I don't like this. So Amarle, El Amarava, Amrina Mapitz v'cherev v'chetz shanun, ishoneh b're'ewei shaker. Let's start from the end, another pasuk of Mishle. Someone who lies falsely for a friend, right, will end up with a sword and sharp instruments, right? Basically, you're going to get killed by the sword. Now, this you can't say, well, it won't affect the uman, the craftsman. This could affect anybody. But Amar Rav Ashi Yachle Lemeimar Shev Shnei Havamutana V'inish B'lo Shnei Lo Shachiv. People say, dever, pestilence could be in the town for 7 years, but a person doesn't die before their time. In other words, people say, yeah, you think that there's sin, and then because you sin, you'll die early. But no, I don't believe that. I believe everybody has their time they're going to die. I'm going to die when I'm supposed to die. My actions are not going to affect, and therefore that really isn't a good tactic. Okay, so now we move on to a totally different tactic. Rabbi Ashi, instead of saying, let's scare them into thinking this sin will cause this punishment, because even though the pasuk says it, right, people will say, oh, I don't really, it's not I don't believe that. I think I have a different philosophy about this. So El Amar Rav Ashi, Amar li Natan bar Merzutri, quotes someone else having told him, Amrina lu Sade Shakre Augrayu Zile. Even the person who hires false witnesses um, belittles them, okay, and speaks poorly about them, meaning you're doing something that is a despicable thing, and even the people who hire you think you're despicable. How do we know this? Well, we're going to quote Izevel. Remember, in the story of Achav, King Achav had a terrible wife, Izevel, and what happened with her? Well, there was what happened in this story. There was a vineyard of Navot that Achav really wanted. And what Izevel did was she saw that he wanted it. She did a whole what do you call it? Shenanigan. And she basically said, we're going to set up Navot as if he rebelled against the king. We're going to bring false witnesses. And here's her line. Hoshivu. Okay, she sends this letter with all these details in it. Hoshivu Shnayim Anashim B'nei Bilyal. Take two really bad people, okay? She is hiring them. She calls them bad people, negdo, that will be against him. And they will say, you curse God and the king. Okay? And that, that Navot curse God and the king. And even she calls them. And that's what Rav Ashi concludes. Okay, next section. Now we're going to start a whole different thing about the Bifanenu. And here's one of my favorite sugyot, and we've learned parts of this before, but here you see this is like the real sugya where it all comes up, and you'll see in a minute why I like it. Okay, this was all the just quote, and they didn't even quote the whole thing. But if you say, I heard the person, right, admit they owed money, that's not good enough. Has to be that the person said, in front of me, this person said, in front of us, meaning the witnesses, and meaning basically they designated us as witnesses. So, specifically the debtor designated us as witnesses. Misayele, the Rabbi Yehuda, this supports the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. To Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, he quoted Rav as saying, Tzarich she'omar atem edai. The debtor has to say, you are my witnesses. Without saying you are my witnesses, they can't testify about anything they heard him say or her say. Why is this? Well, we're going to learn this right now. Itmar Nami was also said, Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So also not just Rav, Rabbi Yochanan also said the same thing. Manali biadcha. I go to you and I say, you owe me money. Amar lo hein. And you said, yes, I do. You're right. Limachar amar lo tnei uli. So I go back to you the next day and I say, hey, yesterday you said you owe me money. Now pay up. Amar mishatani b'cha. And you say, I was just joking. Patur, you're exempt. You can say, I was just joking. Why are we just joking? Because you say that, I came to you and I said, you owe me money. And you said, that's ridiculous. You don't owe me money. I said, yeah, in a cynical way. You didn't really mean it. Or we don't know if you meant it or not, but you can claim you didn't mean it. Fascinating halacha. You can claim, I didn't really mean what I said. I was just saying yes, but I didn't really mean it. Now, this is obviously only if I preempted and I said, right? It would be different if you said it, perhaps. But here I say, you owe me money. And you said yes. That yes could mean all sorts of things. And we go with, if you claim I was just joking, we believe you and you don't have to pay anything. Tanya Namihachi, also bright to support, and this goes a little farther. Manali biad chamar lohen, lemachar amar lo tinei uli amar lo mashatani b'chapatur. That's what we just read. V'lo od ela, not even that. Afilu hechimin lo edim me'achorei gader. Before I said this, I hide some witnesses behind the fence. And I say, amar lo maneli biadcha, and I say, you owe me money, right? I want the witnesses to hear this. Amar lohen, and you said yes. And then I say, ritzon chasha todeh b'fnei ploni uploni. Do you want to admit this before witnesses? Amar lo, you say no. Mityareani shematakpeni ladin. I don't want them to, I don't want to end up in court over this, which sort of means, and this is why it's even in this case, it sounds like you really do owe the money. You just don't want to admit it in front of witnesses. Lemachar amar lo tneuli. If the next day I say go give it to me, amar lo mashatani b'chapatur, and you say I didn't really mean it, you're exempt. Okay, so basically, even if it sounded like I really do owe you the money, but I'm just not willing to say it in front of witnesses, I don't want anything formal here, we still can't accept it. Ve'ein toanim lemesit. The Braita ends with three very weird words. And we do not make a claim for a mesit. Okay? Make a claim means the court doesn't come in and say, if you didn't make a claim that you could have made to exonerate yourself, we'll give you a claim. We don't do that for a mesit. What's a mesit? A mesit is someone who convinces other people to worship idols. Okay? It's a very serious offense of the Torah. You get the death penalty. Okay, what does this have to do with anything? Excellent question. I'm sure you're wondering, how did we get to Ta'aninan? How did we get to Mesi? Makes no sense. Well, the Gemara doesn't understand it either. Mesi, Mandachar Shmei. That's when the Gemara says, like, who heard about a Mesi? Like, what does a Mesi have to do with this Braita? Okay, we've heard of a Mesi, but it means like, who mentioned his name? That's what Mandachar Shmei. Mi's Kirat Shmo. Okay, well, why is he here? There must be missing words here, and this is what they say. Im lo ta'an ein to'anim lo. Now, in the case where you said, I was just kidding, let's say you didn't say that in court, but you don't want to pay me the money, but you don't know that you can make that claim. The court doesn't say, were you joking? As like giving you help to what kind of claim you can make. The court doesn't help you. However, but if this were a capital crime and there was a way that you could get out of it by claiming something, then the court actually helps you because we're always looking in Dinei Nefashot to get you acquitted. But ein toanim lemesid. However, there's one exception to the rule. So now we're going to get off a bit on a tangent here. Mishna mesid. Why is mesid different? I'm Rabbi Chama bar Chanina. Rabbi Chia bar Abba Shmieli. I was in the Shiur of Rabbi Chia bar Abba, and I heard Shame mesid de Rachmana amar lo tachmo v'lo tchaseh alav. The Pesukim in the Torah says you shall have no mercy. You shall not protect this person at all. That means lo ta'aninan. Okay, we don't give them a claim they could have made. I'm Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman. I'm Rabbi Yonatan. He gives a different reason. Minayin she'ein toanim lemesid. Minachash kadmoni, from the snake in the Adam and Chava story. Amar Rabbi Simlai, Harbe ta'anot hayalo l'nachash lit'on v'lo ta'an. When God basically said the Nachash was responsible, the Nachash could have had a lot of claims. The Nachash basically gets punished because of what Chava did, and what the Nachash was a macy, basically. He, right, seduced her to sin. That's a macy. So, what could the Nachash, okay? And mipneimat lo ta'an lo kadesh. Well, he had a lot of claims he could have claimed. Why didn't God do it? Lefisha lo ta'an hu, because he didn't make his own claims, so God didn't make claims for him and suggest, you want to say this to get out of it? Because Ein Tonim Lemesit. And that's our source, interesting source. My Habalei Lememar. So now, of course, the Gemara wants to know. He had a lot of claims. What could he have claimed? We're only going to bring one of them. I wonder what all the others are. But he says, Divrei Arav, Divrei Talmid, Divrei Mishomim. Divrei Arav Shomim. Okay, now, what happened here? The snake told Chava that she could eat from the tree, right? That it wasn't forbidden for her and seduced her to eat. God said she shouldn't. So now what do you see? If God said she shouldn't and the Nachash said she should, why is it the Nachash's fault? Everybody knows that if God tells you something, and right, the teacher tells you something, and the student tells you something, you're supposed to listen to the teacher, not the student. Because the student says it, that's not the student's fault. It's your fault, right? It was Chava's fault. She should have known who to listen to. It wasn't the Nachash's fault. So the Nachash could claim it's not my responsibility. Amar Chizkiah. Another thing we're going to learn from here, and then we're going to go back to our topic. If you add, it's usually worse. Okay, if you do too much, kind of like tafasta meruba lo tafasta, right? Or you add, it actually makes it worse, right? They always say, speak as little as possible. If you say too much, you can incriminate yourself. It's interesting they specifically say it here in the middle of testimony, where it's like the most relevant. Shneamar amar Elohim lo tochlu mimenu v'lo tigubo, right? This is what Chava says. She said, God tells me, right? Less is more, thank you. It was a good translation. She said, God told me don't eat and don't touch, right? Remember, but if she had just, the whole thing was that she sees nothing happens when she touches. So, right, by adding, God never said don't touch, but she added that and said, God told me don't touch, which wasn't true. And that's really what tripped her up. So now we're going to have two other sources for kol mosif gorea, more is less. And these are totally different. This is like a linguistic thing. Amatayim v'chetzi orko. Both of these are from the Mishkan. Amatayim is 2 amot. But if you get rid of the aleph, it's matayim, which is 200. So by adding one letter, you actually turn 2 into 200. Rav Ashi amar ashtei esrei yiriyot. Ashtei esrei is 11. And if you get rid of the ayin, it's shtei esrei, which is 12. So by adding another word, it actually makes it less. Okay, it's another way of learning it. Okay, now we're back. Now we're at my really favorite line. Okay, so it's one thing to say that you could claim I made a joke. Okay, I was just joking. I didn't really mean it. So we hid witnesses there. I hid witnesses. I wanted witnesses to see that you said you owe me money, which was great, but it didn't help because you could claim, yes, I agree I said it, but I was joking. Amar Abaye, lo shanu ela amar mishatani b'cha. Aval amal lo ayu dvarim me'olam uchzak kafran. You didn't designate those witnesses. I did. But when I come back to you the next day and I say, hey, you admitted yesterday you owe me the money, and instead of saying, I was just joking, I didn't mean it, you say, I don't know what you're talking about, I never said that. Well, then you're already a liar. Why are you a liar? Because I have witnesses that say you said it. You can't claim I didn't say it. That's not my favorite line. We're getting there. Amar of Papa Beredra of Achabar Ada, Hachi Amrina Mishmei to Rabba. So Rav Papa, the son of Rav Ada, Achabar Ada, says in the name of Rava, Komile dichdi lo dechire inche. People do not remember trivial things, which means that when you come the next day, when I come and I claim, yesterday you said you owe me money, and you say, I don't know what you're talking about, you can be believed. You're not uchzak kafran like Abai wanted to say. Why is that? Because you didn't think that conversation meant anything. And because you didn't think the conversation meant anything, you don't remember it. And I'm sure this happens to you. Like people say to me, oh, I remember a conversation we had years ago and it impacted my life, right? Like you told me something and then, this happened. And I don't remember the conversation at all. Okay, why don't I remember it? Because for me, it wasn't so, I maybe said something that I've said a million times and it wasn't any unique conversation. For that person, hearing it the first time, it was a unique conversation. Okay, things like that, where you're not expected to remember things that don't have significance to you. So when you said, yes, I owe you the money, you were joking, okay? Now, instead of saying I was joking, you don't even remember that the conversation happened. So the fact that witnesses testify and say, we heard you say that, you could say, well, I don't remember. It wasn't something that I was supposed to keep in my memory. Okay. And therefore, what's fascinating about this whole sugya, because you actually said, I owe money to someone. Okay. Or you agreed, at least. You said, yes, I owe money. But it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to remember. Now, I know, Becky, I was thinking about that also. There's something different between something that happened yesterday, something that happened a long time ago. But that is not true, at least at my age. It's not true. I can't remember things that happened yesterday, for sure not. My daughter always loves to ask me, what happened yesterday? What did we do yesterday? I don't remember. Like, that was yesterday. A million things happened since then. Who can remember? Right? Trivial conversations from yesterday you don't remember, right? How many times it happened? Somebody calls you and then later you think, what did they call me about? Was I supposed to do something? You just can't remember. So, and usually you forget because it really wasn't significant. They called you about something, and this just happened to me the other day. Someone called me, I only noticed the next day. I said, oh, I see you called me yesterday. What was it about? I don't remember, she said. Like, it happens all the time. We don't remember things that aren't so important. If it was important, she would have remembered. So this is a fascinating line, which is so, so true, I think. Okay. And what's fascinating about it is it's a true statement about the way we function in the world, and it has halachic ramifications. As even if you say you admit you owe someone money, you can be exempt from it because of it. It's really fascinating. Okay. Now we're going to have a slew of stories. There was a canopy bed, so it was covered, and they hid witnesses in the canopy bed. Okay, this is so that they could trip up the person, have the person admit they owe them money, and then claim, I want to get the money. Amarle manali biyadcha. Amarle hein. So it's like a setup. You owe me money. The guy says, yes, I owe you money. Amar, now, the bed's in the room. So you say, those awake and those sleeping will be my witnesses now. They don't see anyone around. So the hope is, person's hoping that the person will agree and say, oh, yeah, sure, because they know there's no one around, even though there is, because they're hiding. Amarle low, but the person says, no, I'm not willing anyway. Okay, even though they don't see anyone, they realize what's going on. They say, no, I'm not willing to do this in front of witnesses. Amar Rav Kahana ha Amarle low. So Rav Kahana says, look, he said no, which means this doesn't count. So even though they admitted it, they didn't want witnesses, and therefore the admission is not admissible in court. Similar story, but a little bit different. He put them in a grave. Okay, I don't know if the person went like underground, actually. Seems a little strange. Maybe just in a cemetery. And Amarle, so he hides witnesses. Amarle manali biadcha. So same exact thing. He says, you owe me money. Amarle hein. He says, yes, I do. Chayayu meitai lahavale sade. The living and the dead will be my witnesses. Well, and Amarle lo. The guy says, no, I'm not willing. Amar Rabbi Shimon, ha Amarle lo. And Rabbi Shimon Paskins, same way. No, he said no. Amar Ravina v'itamer of Papa shmami nameha. You can infer from here. Now, both cases, what happened? The borrower said, no, I'm not willing. But what if the borrower had just been silent? So they say, Hada Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav Tzarich Shamar Temedai. The fact that the borrower has to set up the witnesses, Lo Shnaki Amar Lovev. Either the Lova sets them up himself, the borrower, or Lo Shnaki Amar Malvev is Shatik Love. Or if the Malvev had said, I want these people to be witnesses, and the Lova had just been silent, then it would have worked, actually. How do we know this? Because in all the cases, what did the rabbi say? It's because the Lova said no. Had he not said no and just been silent, it would have actually worked. If he was silent, it would have worked. Okay, now we're going to have another issue that comes up about why. Now, this really goes back more to the case. What if the person said in front of me, okay, not that I was hiding as a witness, but said in front of two witnesses, I owe money to someone. Still, we can't, right? Unless he said, Atem Edai, you are my witnesses. Okay. If just two people happen to be there and the person said, I owe money to so and so, also we can't convict them. Why not? Well, we learned this, by the way, in this issue, not this case, but this issue we learned in Baba Batra. Someone was called Kav Rashu. Kav Rashu means you have a kav full of documents, which means you owe a lot of money to people. Okay, that's what he was known about, that he had a lot of money he owed to people. Amal, man masik bi'ela ploni ploni. He said, I don't owe a lot of money to people. I just owe to this person and this person. And he designates two people by name. Atu tavu l'dina kameder Rav Nachman. So those two people came and said, pay us. You admitted to it. Okay, obviously there wasn't proof of any of that. But the guy admitted he owed money to these two people. So they come and they say before Rav Nachman, pay up. Get this guy to pay up. Amar Rav Nachman, Adam asoi shelo laspiat atzmo. No, people often like to just say they owe money to people because they don't want to look wealthy. We've talked about this before. Either they don't want people coming to ask them for money, for loans, Or they are worried about ayin hara. The people are going to be jealous of them. They're so wealthy. So they like to make themselves look less wealthy. And they claim they owe money to people, but they don't really mean it. Again, saying they owe money, but they don't really mean it because they could have some other motivation for this. Now, here it's a fascinating case because he actually, people claimed he owed tons of money, and he was trying to say he didn't owe money only to two people, and actually not trying to show right? He's trying to show his money's his own, and he only owes two. And yet they still said this. Okay, this is a claim that just works across the board. There was another guy. He was called a mouse who sits on his money. This basically means he was miserly, stingy with his money. When he died, Amar, planyo planyo maske bezuze. He wanted to explain to people why he hadn't spent his money, why he was so stingy with his money, because I owe it to people. Okay? And that's why I didn't spend all my money, because it wasn't mine to spend. I owed it to people. So those two people who he said I owe money to came and said, you know, came to the orphans and said, pay up the money. Again, based on this person's admission. Until the Kamed Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi. So it came before Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi. Amar Lahu, he said to the orphans, Ki amrina nadam asur la'asbi et atzmo, hanimila mechayim, aval achar mitalo. The only time people don't want to make themselves look wealthy is if they're still going to live. This guy was going to die. He had no motivation to do that. So therefore, we take him seriously and you have to pay. So what happened in the case? Paru palga. So they paid half. Okay, they just didn't have the money, I guess, to pay the other half, and they never paid the other half. So Tavinu Ladina Lidak Palga. So the other, right, the guys come back and they say, you still owe us half the money. Atu the Kamed Rabbi Chia. Now this time they happened to go to court in a different court with Rabbi Chia. Amar Lahu, he says the opposite of what we just said. What do you mean? Person doesn't want to make themselves look wealthy. They also obviously care about their children. If you die, you don't just say, oh, I'm dead. Who cares about what's going to happen? You're worried about your children. Also doesn't want his children to look wealthy for the same reasons he doesn't want himself to look wealthy. So basically, you don't have to pay the other half. So what do they say? So let's get back our first half. To which he says, no, that was already a done deal. I can't get the money back. And in any case, it wasn't like it was a mistake. It was just, here's a difference of opinion here. So you happen to come to my court. You got lucky. And, for the second half, we can't undo what was done. Okay. The next section from here to the end of the daf is all about another topic, which is, it has to do with admissions. When I admit I owe money, can the people who I admitted it to write it down as a document? Now, what's the difference? Well, if we write down a document, we're talking about a loan. There's a big difference between a loan orally and a loan written down, because a loan written down is connected with lien, right? The property is lien to the loan. In oral loan, you can't collect from lien property. So if I sell land, then they'll collect it from the people I sold it from, but only if it's written down. So the only way we can write it down is if it was clear. Again, what makes it clear? Not just my saying, I want you to write it down if I admitted, but we're going to see all different signs. That's the question, and there's a debate. But at what stage, or what do I have to do to make it clear that I want, when I said I admit I owe this money, and I said you're my witnesses, did I mean also I want you to write it down or not? So hodad b'fnei shnayim v'kanu miyado. If I did a kinyan with the witnesses, kotvim, then that meant I wanted you to write it down. Right? Like we picked up a handkerchief. That shows I'm serious about this and I want you to write it down. That's an indicator. Im lav, but if we didn't do that, ein kotvim. We don't write it down if I didn't do a kinyan. But bifnei shlosha, in front of three, it's already like a court. So courts always write things down. So if I do it in front of three, velo kanu miyado, and I didn't do a kinyan, Rav amar kotvim. Rav says we write it down. Rav Asi amar ein kotvim. He says just because I did it in front of three doesn't mean maybe I wanted the three to be witnesses, not necessarily judges. Just any three doesn't necessarily mean judges. And there was a case, and even though Rav said we should write it down, Rav decided to go with Rav Asi and not to write it down just in case. Because again, then that would affect anyone who bought property, right? Who buys property from the borrower. Amarav Adabar Ava Ha'udita. Zimnin Katvina, Zimnin Lo Katvina. So this is the same issue. This Odita, which is a Shtar Hoda'ah, this document that there was an admission. Sometimes we write it down, sometimes we don't. What's it dependent on? Knife v'yat ve'lo katvina. Kanfinu ihu katvina. If the judges were already there and you went for the judges and said, I admit I owe this money, they don't write it down. But if I collected the judges, that's an indicator I wanted three people to be judges, then we write it down. Rava Amar, again, this is all just hints of what my behavior meant. Rav Amar, filu kanfinu ihu lo katvina. Even if I gathered them, we don't write it down. I have to say, be my judges. If I didn't use the word judges, no, it could be I just collected three to have three witnesses. But Marbar of Ashamar, Filu Amar Haveledani, each one goes farther than the other. Even if you say, be my judges, Lo Katvinan Adikave Duchta Veshalchi Mazamne Lela Beidina. Till they set a place, the judges send a subpoena, send you a letter, come to court on this and this day. It has to be really, really formal for it to be clear that it's a court. So we have a huge range of what makes it a court. Once it's a court, yes, you can write it down. Now we have metaltale. What if I hodebe metaltale? It's not I owe you money, I owe you an object, a car, let's say. Okay, I owe you a car, v'kana miyado, kotvim. V'imlav ain't kotvim. If not, we don't write it down. Why is that? Theoretically, there's no lien or anything, but what if the car crashes and there's no car to return? Then it becomes a loan. So because it eventually could be turned into a loan and then the property will be liened from that, right? From then, so we don't write it down. But if I did a kinyan again, then kotvim. B'mekarke v'lo kana miyado, amemar amar, ein kotvim, marzutra amar. Kotvim, v'ilchada kotvim. Again, we have a machloket. But when it comes to land, land is different because land isn't like something that could turn into a loan. The land, once I admit it's yours, it's yours. There's no transfer of ownership. There's no item that needs to go. It's yours. Once I say it's yours, it's yours. It doesn't move, doesn't go get lost. Okay? So land would be different. You can always write it down because there's no ramifications. Only when it's a loan are there ramifications if it's Baal Peh or it's written. Here there's no ramifications. It's not like there's property lien to that. Okay? It's not connected to any lien. Ravina ikle ledamharia, got to damharia, amale ravdimi baravhuna midamharia ravina. Metaltale ve'inu be'enei humahu. What if the metaltale are here? And then we know that you can just give them right back. So therefore, it's not going to turn into a loan. Amrle kimakar kedam. He says, you're right. It's like land, and then you can write it down. But Rav Ashi Amar, kevan mechasre guvayin alo. No, just because they're here doesn't mean they'll be here tomorrow. They could get lost before you give them over. So since it hasn't been collected, it could theoretically turn into a loan, in which case we don't allow you to write it down. Okay, last point for today. We now have a document that it was there was an admission, but usually in the document you write the words, they told us, right? He told us to write it down, or she told us to write it down that she owes the money, but it didn't say that. So the question is, can we know that this was done right or not? So by v'Rav Adamri travayu haina de Rish Lakish. Amar Rish Lakish chazaka ein aidim chotmim l'shtar elim kenas sekadol. Rish Lakish says in a different halacha. We're not going to go into exactly this halacha because it's late. But the point being, Rish Lakish says we assume that things were done properly. So if, even though it doesn't say it, we assume the Sofrim would have done it if it was done. Wouldn't have written it unless the person really wanted it to be written. Matkev Rav Papi v'Tamer Rav Huna Breder Rav Yeshua. One of them questioned. This isn't such a known halacha to the rabbis. What, you think we don't know this, but yet the judges, the scribes all know this? What do you mean? The scribes don't know as much as we do. To which the famous answer, this comes up a lot of times, no, this Sofrim, this is their field. They know this better than the rabbis. Okay, they're the ones in the know about this, and yes, they wouldn't write a star unless it was sure the person really wanted it written, and therefore you can assume, even though it doesn't say the person told us to write it, you can actually write it down. Okay, not enough time to really go over this stuff, but in a very quick nutshell, we started with the two opinions of Rabbi Yehuda in the previous Mishna. We discussed those, and then we got to the new Mishna about how they check the witnesses, what the whole process is, and from there the Gemara went into really two things, which is or three things, which is what they threatened the witnesses with to make sure they told the truth. Then we had three answers. Then we got to this whole, you have to appoint the bifanenu, you have to appoint the witnesses and what possible claims they could make if they didn't appoint the witnesses. If the debtor didn't appoint the witnesses, they could claim all sorts of things. Even though they could claim, okay, because if they didn't mean it seriously, then maybe they don't remember. And then we talked about this and how do we know? And again, all the second section of the Gemara was all about what's in a person's head. What do we assume based on person's behavior, what they meant? And that was a shtarodita, when someone admits, and then it really is an admission, but do we go as far as to write it down or not? How do we know whether they intended it be written down or not? And obviously there's in a case where you can't ask the person. If you can ask the person and find out, that's a different story. With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day, and may we hear good news quickly.